So as I indicated, you can always get the lecture that I do on a weekly basis by going to the main page under Zoom online lecture. They're all in here, right? They're all in here. Right, today we're going to start with chapter 4, but they're on here. And if you need help, okay, you can always go to the syllabus, right, and see my office, my online office hours. They are, everybody know they are Monday, Wednesday between 8:30 and 11 in the morning, right? Same as my regular office hour used to be, but they are online. Also, I'm adding Saturday, so I'm available also Saturday between 11 and 12. So these are my office hours, guys. So it's on Monday and Wednesday from 8:30 to 11, and they are on Saturday also from 11 to 12, right? So if you need help, just simply go to the syllabus, click on this link during these times, right? Click on these links, and you want to do it from a computer with a microphone and you know, and speaker, so we can, and then you can ask me questions if you need assistance. So do see me during my office hour if you need help. This is what my office hours are for, right? So make sure you use that, use this tools, okay? Right, any question before we start? All right, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close this one. And I wanna maximize the width. Now, whenever I use the projector, it slows down the system, all right? And, you know, so sometimes you see lags when I'm doing presentation. This is because of that, right? So today we're going to talk about decision making. Chapter 4 talk about decision making, which is an important chapter. It is part of what we call control structures, all right? So we're going to talk about decision structures today, and we're going to talk about looping structure or iterative structures in chapter 5. But basically, the idea of programming is that you can write any program, no matter how complicated it is, using one of 3 structures. You can use sequential structure, where you have a block of statement executed one after the other. So you can have statement 1, statement 2, statement 3, statement 4, and you can execute them sequentially, one after another. And this is called the sequential structure. This is what we covered in chapter 3, basically, chapter 2 and 3. Basically, you do things one after the other, right? One step after the other. Okay, sequential structure. They are simple, are very simple. You cannot get lost, right? Because there's only one pass. You take it straight forward to the end. From beginning, we call it entry, to the end, you just take one pass. There's no confusion about that, right? So it's very straightforward. So this one we kind of call it sequential structure. So I want to put a box around it. So you enter it in one entry, you exit in another exit, right? There's other structure we're gonna talk about today. You can have a structure that start at one point and test a condition. A condition is a Boolean value that will evaluate either to true or false. Either the condition will be evaluated true or false. If it evaluates to true, you may do maybe statement 1. If it evaluates to false, you may do statement 2. And these two will meet again, because there is a branching in here, right? They branch in 2 different ways. They meet again to a connecting point, and then will continue, and this will be your exit, right? There's another structure. that we're going to cover today. This is in chapter 4. This is called the decision structure. Sometimes we call it selection structure. This is the purpose of this chapter. This is what we're doing today. Right? We're going to cover decision structure. So you can enter from one point, but you can execute statement 1, or you can execute statement 2, right? And then you can continue. So example, right? You're trying to compute the gross pay of an employee, hourly employee, right? You need to check how many hours the employee worked. If the employee worked more than 40 hours, you compute overtime. If he worked less than 40 hours, 40 hours or less, there's no overtime. Overtime will be 0. So how much overtime he get depend on how many hours he worked, right? So this will be decision structure. So it's very, very common. You encounter it very often in real life. The third one, which you want to cover in chapter 5, you start with a entry point, right? And you test the condition again. Condition always is going to evaluate to true or false, right? For example, is the hour less than 40, less or equal to 40? It's either true or false. It cannot be any other way, right? So if this condition evaluate to be true, you execute a statement. When I say statement, it can be one or more statement. It doesn't have to be just one statement. It can be group of statement also, if you like. Then it go back and retest the condition again, right? And if the condition is true, it do statement 1 again. Then it goes back. That's the condition. If it's true, do statement 1 again. It keep on doing this thing. This is, this is a loop, if you like to see. You have a circle in here, so it's a loop. It's repeating. It keep on repeating this thing until the condition become false. Once the condition become false, you would exit the structure. You exit the loop. This is, we call it iterative or looping structure. And then we're going to talk about that in chapter 5, right? So this is the 3 structure you can use to write programs. And no matter how complicated the program, all right, it can be as simple as computing the average, or as complex as calculating whatever it is, a trajectory of a rocket going to the moon, or whatever have you, right? You can write a program using these 3 structure combination, a combination of these 3 structure, right? And this is important in programming, because if you notice that these 3 structure, all what they have in common, is that they have single entry, single exit point. You enter a structure from one point and you exit from one point. You enter the decision structure from one point, you exit from another point. Similarly for the looping structure, and single entry, single exit point. So this is the important thing about that. And this is important in programming, because in the older day of programming, in the older age of programming, they didn't used to use this structured methodology. They used to write program any way they like. So they used to write program in a way that you have in here line of codes, right? And system is frozen a little bit. And then you may have branch instructions. So you're saying here, this is your program. And you may say at this point, you may say, okay, I want to branch from this statement to this statement, right? So you have branch instruction. And then maybe this statement is say, I want to branch from here to here. And maybe this statement may say branch from here to here. And very clearly, you would see that there's a problem with this code, because it's hard to read. If you try to compare it to something, it look like something you eat. It look like a spaghetti ball, right? where the branches are mixed, tangled together, and you cannot read your program if you don't understand it. This is non-structured program, and very soon they discovered that this one is a bad practice. So they say you should not write a program like this. So they came up as a result with a structured programming language, like Pascal was the early programming language that was structured, and C++ and the other thing, and say, okay, these newer programming languages can support and encourage the programmer to use the single entry, single exit point structure, so you don't have the spaghetti code in it. All right. So this is becoming important. So today we're going to concentrate. So chapter 3, we talk about sequential structure. It's very straightforward. You do one statement after another. Right. Today we're going to concentrate on selection structure, decision structure, to make decision, and we're going to talk about 3 types of selection structure. We're going to talk about one-way selection, where either you do one task or you don't do it. And we're going to talk about two-way selection, which is what you see right now. Either you do statement 1 or you do statement 2, 1 or 2 options, right? Right. For example, right, one-way selection would be, all right, you will get a bonus if you sell more than $100,000 worth of merchandise. If you didn't sell any more than $100,000, you don't get any bonus. So this is an example of one-way selection. Either you get a bonus or you don't get anything, right? Two-way selection may be getting an average in an exam, getting an average above or equal to 70 or below 70. If you get above 70, above or equal to 70, you pass the class. If you get below, you don't pass the class. Basically, pass or no pass. This is two-way selection. If it is true, you pass. If it's not true, you fail. Two-way selection, right? And you can have a multi-way selection. For example, computing the letter grade of a student based on a letter grading system, not pass, no pass, right? In this case, if the student have an average of 90 or more, he will get an A, right? If he had an average between 80, above 80 or above, and less than 90, he'll have an average of B. And if he have an average with 70 or above and less than 80, he get a grade of C, etc. This is a multi-way selection, so it gives you not just one outcome, but give you multiple outcome. In this case, you have a multi-way selection. That's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about one-way selection structure, two-way selection structure, and multi-way selection structure. And we're going to see what kind of code you would use to implement these structures. So I'm going to start here with an example that is nothing new that we used before in chapter 3. This is a form that everybody know how to create, similar to what we did in chapter 3. Basically, it have 2 test score, and we're going to compute the average, right? Okay, and well, let's go ahead and name them. All right, so I'm going to name this one. This is a text box, a good name in here, prefix txt, and score 1. And this will be txt score 2. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the projector because this is going to slow down the system. Whenever I have this thing on, it just slow down the system. So I'm going to turn this thing off. This will speed up things better. All right. All right. So we have in here txt score 2. And this is the output, the average. Okay, this will be labeled. So we call it LBL average. And this is a button BTN calculate. So nothing new in here. This is basic chapter 3 stuff, BTN calculate. All right, so we have that. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and program the BTN, the calculate button. I want to double click it. Okay, and put you in the code window. So in the code window, I want to go ahead and increase the font. Make sure everybody can see it well. I'm sure you can. It's not being projected from, but let's say tools, options, and let's do fonts. Okay, increase the font to 22 point. All right, so we have that. All right, so all right, everybody know the structure. So step 0 is you declare your variable, right? How many variables we need to declare? Right. You look at the form. Each input, which are text box, is a variable. Each output, which is a label, is a variable. So we have 2 input, which are the scores, and output, 1 output. So you need 3 variables. In this case, the score may be, let's say that they're going to be a whole number. They're going to be integers. The average is going to be floating point numbers. All right. So these are going to be integers. This is going to be double. So let's go and declare them. So in here, them, int, score 1 as integer. And then we have the average. This is double, dbl average as double. All right, so this is you declare your variables. All right, so it's very simple. All right, now notice I'm using the same name as the control. The only thing I changed is instead of using txt, I'll put int for integer, right? Instead of using lbl in here, I'll use dbl for double. So the type, I'll use that. Now, I can do custom kind of error trapping, but I want to just do it a simple generic one. So I will use a try, right? And here it is. In the catch block, I'll put an error message. Message box that show numbers only. All right, so if we enter any invalid value in the text box, it will catch it. And here we're gonna put in here step 2, which is the input. All right, so and of course you're gonna do step 2 later on. So you need to put them in this order. Step 3, okay, this is actually 2, this is 1. And this is gonna be processing. And you have step 3 is the output. Right. Now, inputs is always, I promised you, I told you at the beginning, you're gonna find it kind of, you know, how I do the input, but once you get used, it's gonna be mechanical. Always at the beginning, also you have to add option strict on in here. Right, so in here, this is to make sure that we cannot you use conversion functions in this section. So in here we have the first input is the first score and score 1. And this, since this is an integer, right, we use the CINT. And this will correspond to values txt score 1.text. And then we have int score 2. And the corresponding control is txt score 2. This has to be converted also to integer. Right, so this is it. This is the input. Processing, and here we're computing basically the average, dbl average. And we need to sum up the 2 scores, dbl int score 1 plus int score 2 divided by 2. All right, this is the processing. And the output, we display the average. LBL average dot text equal to, basically we're using here dbl average, the numeric variable, dot toString convert to a number to string, that to string, and then format it as in a comma separated value. So use n, right? C will give you $sign, n will give you comma separation, but no $sign. So this is the code basically. This is what you need to do this thing without decision making right now. So this is just a plain version right now. This is 100% chapter 3 material, nothing new in here. So if I run it right now, I should be able to enter 2 test score and calculate the average and all of that, right? But we're gonna do a little bit more, okay? We wanna display a message if the average is, let's say, more than 90 or 90 or more, 90 or above, we're gonna say great work, right? Encouraging message, right? Let's try this one. Let's go ahead and put in here a value. Let's put in here 70 and let's put 80. The average will be 85, right? 75, yeah, so that's it, so 75, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and modify this program a little bit, all right? I'm gonna go to the design view, or click on the tab, Form 1 Design, and I'm gonna expand this one a little bit, give it more room and move the calculate button a little bit below. And I'm gonna take this label that already made, copy it, Control C and Control V to paste it, to create another label that look like a text box. And I wanna just put it below that, right? And I'm gonna name this one, because it's a property window. I'm gonna name this one LBL message. Right, we're called LBL message. So we're gonna display a message, great job, whatever it is, something if he did, if he got an average of 90 or more. All right, so let's go ahead and see how we're gonna change that. How we can change that to display a message and send here, great job. How do we do that? Okay, so let's see how we're gonna do that. All right, so in here, what we do is we can use an if statement. Right, if you like, not in here, not in the processing. If you like, you can declare in here, since we have an extra label in here. So we have 2 output now, right? So we need to declare a variable for this other output, right? This is a textual output. It's not gonna be number, it's gonna be string. Text are string. So we can declare a variable if you like for that. So in this step 0, let's declare a variable for that. Dem str message as string. And it's a good idea to initialize the string to an empty value. Always do that, because numeric variables are always initialized. They are always initialized to 0, but not string variables. So string variable is a good idea when you declare them to initialize them to an empty string like this one. All right, so you can initialize it there. And in here, in the processing, right, you have to make decisions. Okay, I did indicate it early. I told them at the beginning, you're gonna see the large portion of your program is gonna be in step 1 and 3, right? And step 2 is going to be small. But now as we go through advanced chapter 4 and 5, you can see that the majority of your work is going to be in step 2. So you can do lots of processing in here. So in here, we have to make one-way selection. All right, what we're going to do, and I close the projector. What we're going to do is we're going to basically, let me turn it back on and just bring it on. On, but let's go ahead and use that. So we're gonna use in here, we're gonna use this decision structure. We're gonna say, let me maximize that. We're gonna say that basically, we're gonna check if the average, DBL average, is greater or equal to 90. We're gonna check this condition. Is the average 90 or above? If it is, then we're gonna, if this is true, then we're gonna display basically we're gonna say display good work message, okay? If it is false, we don't want to do anything. This is an example of a one-way selection. Either you say good work or you don't say anything. It's a one-way selection, right? It's different than the one we showed before, right? This is one-way selection because it have either one way or nothing. The other one, the two-way selection you saw before, it have two passes. You can do the true pass and the false pass. You have two passes, but in the other one, this is two-way selection. The one that we're gonna do in this example is one-way selection. Either we say good work or we don't say anything. So let's go ahead and go back to this one. And the condition, this is notice the condition. The condition in here is this one. Is the aggregate equal to 90? So whenever you're making condition, you have to use what we call comparison operators, right? This is what we call comparison operators. And let's go ahead and talk about that. Sometimes we call it relational operator. This is you use them with any programming language, you can use that. All right. So I'm gonna put in here the operator. And this is you can say equal. This is the meaning. Equal. If the two values are related, how they are related, are they equal, right? You can use in here, this one is not equal. No spaces between them. You can use this thing is greater. The operand on the left-hand side greater than the operand on the right-hand side. You can use less than. The operand on the left-hand side less than the operand on the right-hand side. You can use greater or equal, no spaces. Less or equal. No spaces again. So these are relational operator. We can use them to make decision. We're gonna use them often, all right? So in this case, what we're gonna do, we're gonna do a decision structure to implement one-way selection. So we're gonna implement, going back to this one, we're gonna implement this structure. You implement this structure using a statement called the if statement. So you say in here if, and then you put the condition. Basically, in this case, if DBL average greater or equal to 90, then you do whatever the work you want to do. This is how you do one-way selection. Use the if condition, then you do whatever you need to do. So whatever you put between if and if will will represent this thing. This is what is between if and if, right? This will go between if and if, right? So this is what we're going to be using. So in this case, let's go ahead and go to the code window, and you have to use a one-way selection, all right? So we can use in here if, and we have DBL average. If it is greater or equal to 90 in this case, right? Then, and what we want to do, we want to set then the message, right? Initially the message is empty, doesn't say anything. This is the message, it's empty initially, right? If this, however, the average is 90 or above, we're going to change that to say good work. So we're going to say in here, str message equal. And good work is an example of string literals. String literals you put in double quote. Right, so good work, right? So that's what it is. So in here, let's put that. So this one, if the average is greater than 90, you'd say this work. This is part of processing. On the output, we need to display that message. So we can say in here, LBL message dot text is going to equal to str message. Notice because str message is a string, you don't need to convert it. It's already a string, right? So you don't have to say that to string, right? It's already a string, right? So you just say LBL message dot text equal str message, and it should do it, right? Let's go and check it right now. I'm gonna go ahead and run it. And hopefully this projector application is not slowing down the system. It just, whenever I turn it on, it does slow it. But I need to keep it on because I may have to write something else later on. All right, so this is the form, right? So I want to put in here, let's put a grade in here. Let's say as I did before, 80 and 70, right? This is going to give you an average 75, nothing to scream about. So the boxes remain empty, doesn't display anything, right? Let's try something else. Let's put in here 190. This is average of 95. Let's calculate. It should display great work, right? Let's say in here, calculate 95, good work. So display message when you have, when the average is, when you meet the condition, the average is more than 90. When this condition is true, it display this outcome and give you this outcome. Now, let's try, notice the importance of initializing the string to an empty string. This is extremely important to do that when you declare it, to initialize it to an empty string, because if you don't do that, you're gonna get a problem. If you don't initialize to an empty string, and if you get an average less than 90, is gonna it's not initialized, it's gonna display junk, or it's gonna give you an error message, a runtime error. So you need to initialize it in here. Let's go ahead and run it again. This is okay. Now let's go back to a value that is less than, let's say 85. Less than, an average less than 90. It should remove that, because when you run it again, it's gonna go through this declaration, is gonna initialize the message to an empty string again. So it's gonna clear out the good work. So it will get it, 87.5 is gonna clear it. So it's working okay. So this is an example of one-way selection, right? You do one-way selection by using the if-then, the if structure. Use the if structure to do one-way selection, right? So this is an example. Let me go ahead and save this one. And let's create a new version of this thing. I'm gonna close this application file, close solution. And I wanna create a copy of this project for two-way selection. So in here, let me go ahead and all right, so I'm gonna, okay, show the desktop. Okay, let's go to desktop. I'm gonna close this one. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and create a copy of that project. And this is kind of slow because I have the projectors on. Okay. So I created average score 1. Let's copy this one, Control C and Control V. it should give me another copy of the project. And this, I'm gonna call it average score 2. By the way, I still get some people sending me assignment when they send me the work that they sending me only one file, that they go and send me this file, only one file. This is not gonna work. You have to do the entire project folder. So when you're done with a exercise, you would select the entire solution folder, average score 1, right click on it, and then select send to compressive file. Okay, and you send me that file, right? If you just send me the SLN file, or you put the SLN file in a zip file, I'm not going to grade your work because there's nothing to grade, right? So I'll make sure to send me the entire thing, right? So anyway, so we have that. I created score 2. Let me go ahead and open that. So I'm going to do in here file, open project, and I'm going to go to the desktop, classes 103, VB4, average 2, and let's open that. All right, so it's the same thing right now, right? It's a copy of it. So I'm going to click on Solution Explorer, double click on the form to open it. What I want to do in here, I want to modify the program, which is still there, to make it two-way selection structure. I want to basically do now something like this. So, okay. So I want to do in here, make a decision, check if the average. I want to abbreviate that to make it smaller. If it is greater or equal to 70. So we ask this question. If it is true, we're going to say passed, right? If it is false, we're going to say did not pass. And then we're going to have in here a connector and connect these two together. So this is what we're doing. Two-way selection. So you have two passes. If it's true, you do one thing. If it is false, you do another thing. The way you implement that is with the if statement. So in here you say if DBL average greater or equal to 70, then you would do this one. Else, you would do this one. And if. Right? So if the average greater or equal to 70, you put the pass value in here. If it is not, else, that means it's not greater or equal to 70, not pass. So you do that. Okay? So this is the idea. So in this case, when you do two-way selection, use if else, you add an else clause, right? The else clause will execute when the opposite condition is true. That means the average is less than 70, right? It will execute. So let's go ahead and see how we're gonna put that in code. It's very straightforward. So in here, we're gonna add, we're gonna change this one to say, instead of good work, we're gonna say, maybe, congratulations, you passed, right? Otherwise, I say else in here, str message equal, and here, keep trying. All right. So one of two things, all right? Either congratulations or keep trying, right? So this is two-way selection, right? Use if, else, if, right? This is two-way selection. I may need to increase this thing, the size of this thing, because it may not fit. Let me go ahead and adjust this thing. And I probably need to increase this thing. Oh, right, so this should fit, I guess. All right, anyway, let's go ahead and run it. So all right, so it's running. Just take a little time to start. Okay. Right, here it is. So it enters score 1. So again, let's say in here we have 70 and 80. The average 75, so the person is going to be passed. So, oh, this doesn't work, right? You know what's the problem? Where's the error? I need to change this one to 70, right? So in here, let's go ahead and run it again. So now it's gonna say congratulations, you pass if the average is 70 or more, and keep trying if the average is less than 70, right? So okay. Right, so in here, let's try it again, 70 and 80. This is average of 75, so congratulations, you pass, right? Now let's try something else. Now let's try in here, say 65, right? So the average is 67.5 is not 70, so it's a keep trying. All right, so so it works. It's a two-way selection. You get one or two different messages, two different outcomes. So you implement two-way selection using if, else, and if. That's how you implement it. All right. And the other one we're gonna do now is we're gonna do change things now differently. Right. I'll change the form. All right. So this one okay, and we're gonna add the letter grade in here. I should have saved this one as two-way selection. It's fine. We don't need it. So in here we have grade. Oh, not the name. Okay. Right, and in here we're gonna call it LBL grade. Right, so this one is going to become LBL grade and it says LBL message. So we have that. Right, so let's go ahead and go to the code window. So now we have to, we don't have str message anymore. We have str grade. All right, so it's going to be letter grade. And there's no str message anymore. So we're going to delete this whole thing. We're going to redo it now for this thing. And we need to determine in here letter grade. Right? Okay. Now, when you do multi-way selection, what you're gonna creating is a structure that's gonna look like this. Basically, you wanna check in here. You're gonna check a condition in here. You wanna say is DBL average is, you have to choose either let me zoom in. You have to choose either you wanna start from A and go all the way down to F, or you're gonna start from F and go all the way up to A. It has to be in order. You cannot just go any way you want. All right. So you're gonna, let's say we're gonna start with the letter grade F. So first we're gonna check if the average is less than 60. If the average is less than 60, if it is, okay, I'm gonna put the false and true in here. I usually do it the other way, but let's put in here true in here. If it is true, then grade equal A. If it is false, we check another thing. If the average is not less than 60, that means it is greater or equal to 60. We check if the average is less than 70, meaning it's greater than 60 and less than 70. Again, if it is false, if it is true, then the grade is B. I'm just going to put B in here, but you have to say grade equal B. If it is false, you check if the average is less than 80. If it is true, it means it's a B, it's a C. So this is actually D, sorry. So if it is this one is false, that means it is greater or equal to 70 and less than 80, this is a C. If it is false, you check if the average is less than 90. If it's true, that means it's greater or equal to 80, but less than 90. That means it is a B. Else, if it is false, then it is an A. If it is not less than 90, that means it's greater or equal to 90, so it's an A. So all of these connects together, so they connect in here. This will be the exit point. Right. There's an example of else if, else if, else if, else if. I'll show you how to implement that. So let's go ahead and see how we're gonna do that in the code. So it's a multi-way selection in here, right? And you have to do it. I can just write a few of them. So I can say in here, if DBL average is less than 60, then I just want to put in here F. I'm not gonna, you have to say grade is F. Then you say in here, else if DBL average less than 70, then it's gonna be C. Else if DBL average less than 80, this is D, sorry, then it is a C. Else if DBL average less than 90, then it's a B. Else it's an A. And then you put and if at the end in here. So this is with form multi-way selection. All right. So you use in here. So one-way selection you use if and if. Two-way selection you use if else. Multi-way selection you use if, else if, else if, else if, as many else if as you want, and then else at the end, and you're done. And if. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's implement that using Visual Studio. So I'm gonna go back to here, and we're gonna use start with the if statement, and we're gonna check the average, DBL average. All right, we can say DBL average, if it is less than 60, then we're gonna say in here, STR grade equal A. Else if, what happened? I'm gonna just try again. Okay, so we in here, then we say else if DBL average less than 70, then STR grade equal. I'm gonna copy this one so it'll be less typing for me. Or should I copy this whole two thing in here? So L, if it is less or equal to 70, this is B. Else, if it is less than 80, this is D. I'll always make this error. This is D. And this is F. And this is C. Okay, the idea in here, less than 60 is an F, of course. If it is not less than 70, that means the opposite is true, is greater than 60, and less than 70, it's a D. If it is not less than 70, the opposite is true, that means greater than 70, greater or equal than 70, and less than 80, it's a C. Else, if it is greater or equal to 80 and less than 90, it is a B. And the last one is for A. And this is how you determine the letter grade. Multi-way selection, it basically, you have 5 different outcome, 5 possible outcome. You use it, you use if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else to get, to do that, to handle it, to process this way. And this is a multi-way selection. Let's try it. You can run it and see if it produces a correct result. There's an error I need to fix. There's because I had STR message before. So I need to fix that before I can run it. Let's go ahead and, so this one, it should be not STR message, it should be STR grade. So it gives you an error message. See, there is a build error. Whenever you get this message, there were build error. Would you like to continue? Say no when you get the build error. Okay, the error is shown in red in here, wavy red line, and also it's shown in here on the output window. If you double click on this line where you have the error message, it's going to take you where the error is, which is in here. Of course, this one should be STR grade. Right. Yeah, this should work now. So let's go ahead and try it. Okay. Right. So in here, I want to put. You can try to test all possibilities. You can start with 50 and 60. This will give you 55, which is an F. Then you can try, this is 70 in here, change this one to 70. They give you 65, which is a D. Then you can try 80 in here. 75 is a C. And then 90, 85 is a B. And then 100 in here. 95 is an A. So this is validate that all of them are working. Then you want to test boundary value. So you want to test exactly at 90, see if you get an A. Right, so it works, and then check exactly at 80, see if you get an A B. So you want to check boundary value because sometimes they are tricky, so you have to make sure they work. And you can test it for all the other one, but this is working. It's very important when you write programs, it is your responsibility of the programming to make sure that your program work correctly and produce correct results. So it's your responsibility to test all possibilities of input to make sure that you're going to get the correct result always, right? So do not just submit the assignment once you have it running, because sometimes it may run, but it may produce incorrect result, and you have to make sure it produces correct result. Right? This is the concept of what we're covering in chapter 4, and we're going to go to the PowerPoint presentation in a little bit. But I just want to give you another way to do multi-way selection, right? There's another way you can do multi-way selection, right? You can use the if, else, if, else, if. This is one way. Let me save this one and create another copy of it. I want to go ahead and do file close solution. And I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of that. And so I'm going to select average score 2, copy it and paste it. And this is what called deval average score 3. Right, so we have that. Let's go ahead and open that. So I can do in here file, open, project. I can go to average 3 now and open the solution for that. Right. When you open it, you're not going to see the form displayed. So if you don't see the form displayed, simply go to Solution Explorer and double click on Form 1, VB. And this is going to bring up the form. So let's go back to double click Calculate to go to the code window. And let's modify that to do another way to do the same thing, multi-way selection. You can do multi-way selection in 2 ways. One of them is using if, else, if, else, if. This will always work. You can always use if, else, if. It will work for all situations. But in certain situations, you can use a simpler method, but it doesn't work all the time, called the select case statement. So let's try the select case statement. So I want to delete that out. See how to do it a different way. So in this case, because all the decisions are based on the average, we can factor out the average. We can say select case, and I can say in here the expression that we want to factor out, DBL average. Right? So we can factor it out, and then we can say case is. That means if the average is. less than 60. Then we can say STR, let's go and put them next line, STR grade equal to F. Right? You can use ranges with cases. You can say case, let's say 60 to 69. And you can say STR grade okay, this is C++ notation. Let's change that to 62 to 69. Then we can say STR grade equal D. And then we can just do the cases. I can copy this thing. And then case 70 to 79. This will be C. And 80 to 89. And this will be a B. And then you can say the I think case probably case else, or case else. If it is none of these, you can say STR grade is equal to A. Right. One thing to be careful when you use ranges, this is a range in here, saying if it's between 60 and 69, this is kind of tricky, right? Because what if the average is computed to be 69.5, right? Then it's not going to match any of the cases, right? 69.5 is not less than 60. It is not between 60 and 69, right? 69.5, right? It's not between 70 and 79. So it's going to fall to the trailing else, and they're going to give you a grade of A, which is in here, it's like what we call in here a more like a loophole in your code. So let's go ahead and verify that. Let me show you that this doesn't give you the correct result, right? So this is kind of very tricky if you're not careful of it. Some people that may need to get a D or F may get an A, right? Let's try that, right? So let's go ahead and put in here. Let's try that he got in the first exam 69, and the second exam he got 70, right? This is 69.5, which should be really a it should be D or a C. It cannot be an A, right? But when you calculate, it's going to give you a grade of A, right? The reason you get that is because it doesn't match any of the cases. 69.5 is not in any of these ranges, right? So it's going to fall to the case else and give you an A, right? How do you fix that? Right? You know, one way you can use the case is, but if you're going to do that, you may as well just use the if statement because it's almost the same amount of work. One way you can fix that is by converting the average to an integer using the CINT function. If you use the CINT function, then if the average is 69.5, it will round it up to 70, and then it will fall into this range, and it's going to give you a letter grade of C, right? So this is probably the way to do it. All right. So if you want to use ranges, make sure that the select case have an integer there, not a floating point. Otherwise, you can have a logical error. Let's go ahead and try it now. Now it should work okay. So it should give you C, I guess, for that. So, but let's go ahead and verify that. Always, again, as it's your responsibility as the programmer to make sure your program works, and you need to test it. Make sure that for all cases it works. So I'll do in here 60 and 70. It's going to give you 69.5, and it's going to round it up to 70, and give you get a grade of C, right? Now, if you get in here 69 and maybe 69.5, 69.70 or 0.9, okay, is gonna round it down. Let's see. Oh, okay, 69.5. Okay. I guess in the calculation when you do this thing, it's rounding it up. I guess I don't know. So, anyway, this will take care of that. So you have to use in here the CINT function to convert to an integer. And this is the three-way selection you can have: one-way selection, two-way selection, and multi-way selection. I'm gonna go ahead and start the PowerPoint presentation. We're not gonna go much far with it, but we're gonna start with that to cover the concept. So there's more concept in chapter 4 than before, and it is the problem gonna be more challenging, all right? Because you have to make decisions. Like for the bot example that your classmate was asking, in chapter 4, you have to use if statement to ensure that the user doesn't enter values other than 1, 2, or 3. This is you use if statement to validate that. So we're going to do more stuff that you can do with if statement differently next week. But let me go ahead and start the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to go ahead and close the navigator because this one is eating up resources, and I will start the PowerPoint presentation. All right, so chapter 4 talk about decision making, right, using if statements basically and select case statement, and we're going to talk about the decision structure, right? We talk about 3 ways to make decision: one-way selection with if then statement, two-way selection with if then else statement, multi-way selection with if then else if statement, right? And we're going to talk about putting an if statement inside another. It's called nested if statement. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about logical operator. We did talk about comparison operator, but you have also logical operators. Logical operator are like the AND operator and the OR operator. So it allows you to combine 2 conditions together. And then we talk about comparing and testing and working with strings. So you can compare a string also using relational operators. So you can see if 2 strings are equal, if one string is bigger than other string or less than another string. So we'll talk about how comparison happens with strings. Then we'll talk about the select case statement I just introduced today. So we'll do more example on that. And then we'll talk about input validation. This is an important concept, is to validate input. Very often, there's a saying that is garbage in, garbage out. If your input is incorrect, is invalid, then your output will be invalid, will be incorrect. So it is important to validate the input to make sure that the input is valid. For example, if you enter for, you want to enter input for the age of a person. If you enter a negative value, then it's not a valid age because a person cannot have a negative age, right? So sometimes you want to check if a value is positive or not. This is a part of input validation, all right? So we'll check on that, right? And then we'll do an example, big application that use also radio button and checkboxes. Now, radio button and checkboxes are 2 controls, new controls that we're going to cover in chapter 4. That's going to make it possible to use buttons and checkboxes for decision making. All right. The difference between radio buttons and checkboxes: radio buttons are mutually exclusive. Right. That means select only one item, not multiple items. For example, for gender, you can select one gender, but not 2 genders. But for checkboxes, they are not mutually exclusive. So you can select multiple items at the same time. Right? And then we'll do an application, a last application that incorporate all the concepts that we covered at the end of the chapter. So we're going to spend some time with this one. Definitely, we're going to spend some time next week and maybe the week after that covering chapter 4. Right? So it's an important chapter, and the exercises are a little bit more difficult than what we saw in chapter 3. Decision structure, right? So the order of statement execution, I already explained that through the flow charting thing that I showed you before. So what we did so far in chapter 2 and 3, our code has been executed sequentially in sequence structure, one after another. To write meaningful program, however, we need multiple paths of execution. Meaningful program, they gross pay is not always computed the same way. It's not always going to be the hours times the rate. Sometimes the gross pay is the hours times and a half the rate, depending on how many hours you worked. So you have to make decision, and these you do them with what we covered in chapter 4. Some statement should be executed under certain circumstances. This is decision structures that we're going to talk about in chapter 4. And this chapter present mean to execute statement conditionally to make decisions. Next chapter present means to execute statement repeatedly, to repeat things using a loop. So we're going to cover that next week, next in chapter 5. Right, this is the decision structure. You check a condition. If the condition is true, you can do one thing. If it is false, you may do another, or you may do nothing. This is an example of a one-way selection. If it is called outside, you wear a cord. If it is not, you don't do anything. So it's a one-way selection. So a flow chart is a typical decision structure that show you the basically graphically what the logic is. You evaluate the condition. If it is called outside, you would wear a cord. If it is not, you don't do anything. So this is an example of that. All right. So one-way selection. This thing, you do it with if-then statement. It's a one-way selection. You do it with the if-then statement. Let's talk about that. The syntax of the if-then statement is you check an expression, if expression. If the expression evaluate to true, then you execute the statement or the statements that are between if and if. If the expression is false, you don't execute the statement or the statement between if and if. So again, here the expression is true, you execute the statement between if then and if. Otherwise, the statement are skipped, they're not executed. In order to make decision or create conditions, you have to use relational operators. Relational operators are used to relate data to see if the how two operand relates. Is one greater than the other, or is it less than, or is it equal, or whatever have you. These are the relational operator: greater, less than, equal, not equal, greater or equal, less or equal. Notice no spaces between these two symbols. When you have two symbols in here, you have no spaces between them. Here's an example. Usually, the condition will give you one or two possibilities. Either it's true or false. Either the length is greater than width, which is true, will be true, or it is not. If it is greater, it is true. If it is false, it will be. If it is not, it will be false. Same thing with this thing. If the size is less or equal to 10, it's going to return true. If the size is greater than 10, it's going to return false. So you can use a relational operator to formulate a question. Is the length greater than the width? Is the size less or equal to 10? Very important thing to remember. Relational operator is going to give you one or two values, either true or false. There's no gray area, right? Sometimes in English, there's a gray area. Someone will say something and you don't understand exactly what does he mean. But with programming, there's no gray area. Either it is true or false. Here's an example in here. We check if the sales is more than 50,000, we say you earned a bonus, right? So you can put in here, if the condition is true, you can execute one statement like in this example. So in this case, if the salary is more than 50,000, you just display a message, you earned a bonus. But if you want, you can do more than one statement. So in this second example, if the sales is more than 50,000, then you do three things. You don't just say that you earned a bonus, you do three things. You would say basically, you've earned a bonus, you set the commission rate to 12%, and you give the employee a day off, right? So in this case, because all of these three statements falls between the if and if statement, they are executed only if the sales is more than 50,000. Right? So again, this is an example of one-way selection. Either you do these statements or you don't do them. Some notes, the if and then must be on the same line, right? You cannot do something like this. You cannot say if decimal sale greater than 50,000 and then put the then on the next line. It has to be in the same line as the if statement. The and if must be on the same line too, and on should be on a line by itself. Only a comment may follow the then. The and if statement must be on a separate line. Only a comment may follow the and if. Right. We did an example on the computing the score average for the one-way selection. So this will be the example. The important thing about programming style, when you look at this one, notice something you would see that Visual Basic automatically does, which is make it easy to read your code. Notice the indentation between the select and the cases. Is indented. This will make it easier to see the cases. If you put everything on the same level, then it's hard to read. You won't understand what the code is. So then luckily, Visual Basic does the indentation for you. This spacing in here is important. It's part of good programming style. Not putting spaces is going to make your program hard to read, and it will be basically easy, difficult to maintain. So always you need to put indentation to make it easy to understand. The code between the if and then and the if then and the and if is indented. This indentation is very important for good programming style because it makes the program easy to understand. Visual Basic does not require that. The code doesn't require it. You can put everything on aligned with the first column, but it would be very difficult to understand your program if you do that. Visual Basic does not require it, but it is convention among programmers to aid in the readability of the program. It's important to understand your program to do that. So always do indentation. By default, the Visual Basic editor will automatically do the indentation as you enter the program. Luckily, Visual Basic will do the indentation for you, so you don't have to worry about that. It will indent the code. Here's an example. Notice the indentation, right? Between the if and if the statement, the body of the if statement is indented. So it's between the if and if, so you can see it, right? If you put it all to the left margin, you're not going to be able to see it. Now you can use mass operator in the conditions, right? If you do that, if you mix mass operator with relational operator, then the mass operator have precedence over relational operator. So in this case, you add first int x and int y get evaluated first. Then int a minus int b is evaluated second. Then the relational operator is evaluated last. So you do them in that order. You do first this relational, you add these mass, you evaluate the addition, then you evaluate the subtraction, then you evaluate the comparison, right? It does that automatically because a arithmetic operator have hierarchy over precedence over relational operator. But if you want to be clear that this is what's happening, you can put parentheses. This is a little bit easier to read by putting parentheses, that you want to evaluate the addition and the subtraction first before you do the comparison. So you can do that. So most programmers prefer to use parentheses to clarify the order of operations. You can use function call in your condition. So if you want to compare whatever you entered in the text box, but you want to compare it as a number, not as text, right? You have to be careful in here, right? Okay, I don't have the projector. I have to turn it on. Let's turn it on. It's going to be the last thing I want to do, and then I will call it off for today, but I'm going to go ahead and use the projector. You have to be careful when you use comparison, right? Everybody know what's 2, what is this one? Is 2 greater than 100? Is this true or false? This is definitely false, right? And you're gonna get false value because you're comparing numbers, right? But what would happen if you change that to a string, to text? Is 2 greater than 100 as a text? Right? You would think that this would be false, right? Right? But it's gonna be true. Because in here you're comparing numbers, but in here you're comparing text. So it does make a difference if you compare text. The reason, the logic behind that is you compare, when you compare text, you compare the characters. You compare the 2 to the 1 as a character. And since the 2 as a character is greater than 1, it's going to give you true, right? But when you have a number, you're comparing the whole digits, not just only one character. So it does make difference. So you have to keep that in mind when you do comparison like this. So if you don't use the CINT to convert the text to a number, you may get different result than you expect. So be careful, right? So always you have to convert to make sure you're comparing apple and apple, not apple and oranges, because this is text, right? And this is a number, right? So to compare apple and apples, you have to convert the text to an integer using CINT and then compare the integers together. So you can do that. You can use that in the if statement to do comparison, right? And let me see what else do we have in here. You can use, if you like, and this is it. It's at 12:35, so I'm going to stop the recording right now, and then I will take any question you have. Just give me 1 second.